I am recording it, but I won't use it. Shit. I won't use that. Here, let me put a marker down specifically to say don't use.
So if you're recording, that means no racist stuff, right?
No, that's okay. I always try to catch. That's basically the reason I started recording in the first place was to catch Phil, because he's always saying all this stuff,
Well, he's English, right? I mean, he's got to have imperialism a bit in his blood,
it's like
right?
Old,
no offense, Phil. It's just the truth, right?
It's like old colonial racism, yeah. He says words like buffoon, but somehow you can tell that it means something different. That it's whatever buffoon meant in the 18th century. That's what he's trying to say.
Phil, this is the one time. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just united in my. I just try and get everyone on board with my hatred of the Persians and the Ottoman Empire.
He hates it. He constantly calls it the sick old man of Europe. I don't know what that means.
God.
Just constantly critiquing the Ottomans. Look, whenever I say, hey, Phil, to me an Ottoman is just a footstool, and you say, yes, I agree. I don't... That's not you hiding. That's not you hiding, right? It's okay. We all have foibles.
Oh my gosh. Can't imagine where the show's going to go today.
I don't know. Hello and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Phil, how you doing today? Having a good one?
Not too bad, not too bad.
What's the weather like over there in UK land? It's completely hellish over here.
It's chilly, but tolerable.
Is that
the snow has gone away?
Oh, you had some snow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, a Dickensian wonderland. It's a pretty rare event for you guys, right?
Yeah, I don't know how much Dickens wrote stuff in mid-February, but it was uncommon and just enough for people to be like, "Ooh, snow," and now it's gone.
Well, Dickens lived at the tail end of the Little Ice Age, I think, which is why he had so many white Christmases. Mm-hmm. Is that interesting?
It is, and I did know that.
You did. That's probably a thing every British child knows. Well, hello and welcome to Heavy Hands, a podcast which is not about Charles Dickens, brilliant as he may have been, but instead about mixed martial arts. And we had a doozy of a card this last weekend. There's just no winning sometimes. Normally people bitch about the fact that I'm so negative and cynical. This time I had a bunch of comments you're the only person I've heard be even remotely excited about this card. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I was weirdly optimistic about it headed in. And in retrospect, that kind of feels warranted. I thought it was actually a very entertaining night of fights. We had a little bit of everything. Gastelum Heinisch could have been a lot worse, is what I'm saying. And it was not. It played out in a very entertaining manner. And I think we're going to spend the vast majority of today's episode in recapping UFC 258 before moving on to do a preview of, looks like just the main event from next week's card, which, not to front load the cynicism too much, looks kind of like shit. But before we get into any of that, let me introduce our very special guest. Phil and I are both honored and pleased to be joined by Dan Tom of the Protect Your Neck podcast. Dan? How you doing, man?
Special is right, but thank you guys. It's great to be here.
Come on, no remarks.
On one of the few MMA podcasts I listen to, and I will try not to sidetrack the conversation too much as we did in our pre-show banter, but great to be here, guys.
It's not that kind of show, Dan. We don't make those kinds of remarks. All right. Special. I don't know what you're alluding to, but Phil, yeah, go on. You chastise.
When have we ever got sidetracked?
Yeah. Do you guys want to hear more about Charles Dickens before we start?
Oh my God.
I used to live down the road from his house.
Wow. Phil lives in Twatford upon Avon. That's the other guy, isn't it? All right. Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns, the main event of UFC 258, probably going to take up a good chunk of the episode, and I think it's worthy, because not only was this a sneakily interesting matchup that sort of became more compelling the more you looked at it, it turned out to be basically just fire from start to finish. Very entertaining fight. And then third, the most important, Phil, I think you'll agree, is I think we got a lot right about it. We got one big thing very wrong, which I think is worthy of discussion, but a lot of little tactical things we pointed out were kind of dead on. So I'm feeling pretty good about having evaluated these two fighters, better than I sometimes do. But I'm going to go ahead and let you kick us into it, Phil. The main event. What did you make?
Yeah, it was great fun. And like ended in a finish, meaning that like once more we can hopefully put to bed the idea that Kamaru Usman is somehow boring. And yeah, I think we did get a lot of it right. And I think that what you're alluding to when you say like the one thing we got wrong is directionality.
Yeah, which is often one of the few things I do get right? That's usually the big underlying thing that doesn't change too much.
Yeah, because Burns immediately pushed Usman into the fence. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, like from my perspective, I think Usman said after the fight, that was actually, really how our sparring sessions tended to go. And I think that was very illustrative of what we saw, because I think there's definitely something to be said in a sport like MMA, where the costs for making an error are so high, and the costs for the benefits of making a successful read are also comparatively high. There's a lot to be said, like really committing to your very first guess, especially if you have like a good read on what the opponent is doing. Mm-hmm. As we've seen, several people over the years keying in on, when you're fighting Frankie Edgar, he's got a system of like slips and feints and so on. But pretty much the first thing he does is, slip and move off to the side. Mm-hmm. And so you can just try and hit him with the hardest strike you feasibly can.
Yep.
At the point that he does that, and you might win the fight, or even hurt him badly enough to pick up a massive round. So I think, what we saw basically was Gilbert Burns knowing that the first thing Kamaru Usman is going to throw out is a jab.
Yeah.
And then immediately cross-countering him as hard as he possibly could.
Mm-hmm. And, probably the most hurt we have ever seen Kamaru Usman. So it's hard to call that a bad gamble on Gilbert Burns' part. I mean, I think that is, is there any other time we've seen Kamaru Usman hurt that badly? Or even dropped? It's pretty rare.
No.
Yeah. Dan, I wasn't asking you.
In terms of eating those shots.
Yeah.
It reminded me of who's the BJJ guy who swings like an absolute loony?
That's all of them.
Who fought Kamaru Usman and got knocked out?
Oh, our boy Sergio Moraes.
Yeah, Moraes.
Mm-hmm.
It reminded me of that, of just like him going. Moraes just went after him in that kind of way, but. Mm-hmm. Usman pretty much walked through it. Like the shots were hitting him cleanly, but, and you could see that like he's still going to be vulnerable to that. I think Usman is still someone who is an initiator, rather than like any kind of defensive wizard. Oh yeah. I mean, it was also amusing, like in the same way that watching someone, you could imagine, Aldo watching, Dustin Poirier beat Conor McGregor by running away and using low kicks. It's amusing to like think of Tyron Woodley watching Gilbert Burns just absolutely crack Kamaru Usman with a big right hand as his very first strike.
Yeah, right. But then
it does work, Tyron. You just have to do it earlier.
Yeah, Tyron knows it works. Actually, he tried that exact thing, and instead he was the one who ate the right hand against Burns. So sometimes it works both ways, unfortunately. But Phil, we did say Burns would be dangerous early, and you specifically called an Usman third round TKO. So congratulations for that. You were really right on the money with, what we normally deem the most meaningless part of the pick, the needless specifics. But hey, congrats for that. Dan, what do you say, man? Gilbert Burns came out hot, hurt Kamaru Usman. How did you see Usman work his way back into it?
Yeah, to me, it really just felt more like a pace thing. I know there's a lot of talk right now, which I'm really curious your guys' opinion on, that apparently Usman's never switched stances or jab before, which I don't know how true that is. That being said, obviously he is with Trevor Whitman, and we did see some kind of fundamentals, like we would see him instead of doing kind of stepping shifts, that he would use corralling hooks, get his head off to, depending on the stance of the fighter he was facing, off to that power side, preferably corral, wash, rinse, repeat, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas we saw a bit more of and I know Justin Gaethje is going to be the analogous that's going to get abused here, but we saw more of that kind of more shuffling left to right, keeping your feet underneath you. And that kind of got him caught by a right hand. He drifted right into a right hand off the bat, right? With that jab that Phil broke down. And so, yes, there are differences there. And I don't know if that's part of the game plan or part of like how Gilbert Burns admitted or Usman admitted himself. Like that's how our sparring sessions went. But that was smart to attack him early before he could get set. Right. Obviously the jab, did come into play, and I'll probably let you guys speak on that more. But for me, it was more of a pacing thing. And I tweeted this after, but I didn't talk about this beforehand. I usually figure I'm on a couple podcasts. I'm always having to write about it. I'll get around to it somehow. Right. I don't know about you guys. I'm not a notes guy. I'll write maybe 2 to 3 notes per podcast. I will talk about everything except those notes. And one of the notes was that Trevor Whitman, I believe it's after round 3 against Usman Masvidal. And he's explaining, he goes, okay, when you take him down, he's going to scramble. I want you to follow the scramble, wait till he's done, and then I want you to turn it up. And to me, that was the advice that I always hear Team Quest, the late, great Robert Follis give, which is picking up the pack. And he says, some fighters can only pick up the pack so, so heavy. They can only run so long, and they could only run so hard with all these things at play. Everybody eventually has to put down the pack. And I remember talking to Robert, and this is why Trevor's so damn brilliant. And I'm talking to Robert going, is that a smart time to pick up the pack then when someone puts it down? Because in grappling, I'm not an athletic. I'm never going for the first exchange. Mm-hmm. I'm usually trying to ride out whatever the other guy is doing. Maybe he thinks he's got a triangle. I have good triangle defense. Feel him squeezing. As soon as he's done with his squeeze and his attack, there's a breath there. Right. And if you can attack there, there's just so much, and it's not talked about enough from coaches behind the scenes to frontline analysis to really in play in corner analysis. So that really stuck out to me in the lead up. And I really wish I said something about it, because you saw in the corner that Trevor Whitman was saying, good, this is good, Kamaru. We want him to do this. And I'm not much of an interview guy. I'm like you guys. I'm more of the evidence and analysis of what's there. Mm-hmm. However, in the interviews leading up to it, it really felt like Gilbert Burns, listening to him talk, like he was strapping on a bunch of C4 onto a vest. He was getting ready to make that suicide run, and he was essentially going to play human chicken. And I didn't like that for him, and that's kind of how it played out. I thought it was going to go longer. But yeah, congrats to Phil for being right on that third round TKO.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we were the only people who thought that Burns' best shot would be early. But it's interesting to note, because like you said, I hardly watch interviews and things like that. Interesting to note that he was kind of giving that vibe himself. That also seems to me, what you mentioned, like a really sound way of psychologically breaking people. Making that like a systematic process. If you wait for somebody to expend a bunch of energy, which also means, like will, it means psychological energy too. There's always that moment where they just want just a tiny break. And if that's the moment when you decide to push them twice as hard, that seems to fit right into what Kamaru Usman does so well, whether he's coming forward or not. that is the kind of relentless pressure that eventually just breaks people, which we've seen him do in previous fights. So, yeah, that's an interesting point.
I was just gonna. I think it's notable, like when you hear. I think that there's one thing that you tend to hear from people who are underdogs, who kind of know they're underdogs. It's when they say, "I'm going to be champion," and people who don't think of themselves as underdogs, they generally say something along the lines of, "I am the best." You didn't really hear much from Burns saying like, "No, I'm the best welterweight in the world." It was like, "I'm going to be champion," which is, it speaks to a kind of tactical, I'm going to find a way to win this fight, even though I'm not entirely sure I'm going to win it.
It's an interesting thought, Phil.
Yeah.
Were people really saying that Kamaru Usman doesn't jab and doesn't switch stances at all before this fight?
Not before, but that seems to be the take after. Everyone's like, "Oh, he went to southpaw." Like that's so crazy, and even maybe attributing it to Whitman. And I'm like, he's always switched stance. Like I've had him written as a switch stance fighter for years on my profiles personally, and the jab is something that I've heard. You guys are obviously mentioned it and are good about talking about those details. And I know it's not maybe his like number. He's not like now he'll probably get the GSP comparisons granted, but it's not like he was getting compared to GSP or anything like that prior. But it's just more the after effect. And I don't hate the spirit behind it. The guy deserves credit, and so does Whitman and et cetera. But I felt like I don't know. Am I crazy, guys? Hasn't he kind of always been jabbing and switching stances? I don't know if that was so much the narrative, but maybe it's just me.
He's definitely been switching stances for his entire career. I still think of him as an orthodox fighter, but most switch guys I tend to think of as having like a home stance and then the one that they sometimes go to. And I think of Usman that way, as an orthodox fighter who frequently decides to go southpaw. But the jab, come on. Did nobody watch the Covington fight? That was like the whole thing. That was the whole thing. And Phil, you and I think we talked quite a lot about Usman's jab being pivotal here. In fact, one thing that really stood out to me was the potential for the jab to be a devastating counter to Gilbert Burns' own initiating range weapon, which is his kicks. And in fact, the shot that knocked him down to start the finishing sequence was a jab counter to a kick, or rather like an interruption. It was a stop hit sort of counter, just as Burns was winding up to kick. That happened several times in round 2, and even I think once in round 1 as well, that Usman just fired that jab and interrupted Burns right as he was loading up on the kick. It doesn't matter how much more comfortable you get. The shit that worked way back when you fought Rashid Magomedov is still going to work if the fundamental sort of nature of your game hasn't changed that much. No matter how confident you've gotten, if somebody can time your kick and you're not throwing anything before it, you're going to get cracked with a straight punch down the middle. The jab was, yes, please.
One of the big tide turning moments was Durinho kicking early on in the fight when he had Usman hurt. Mm-hmm. Kicked him, ended up on his back, and then this was a really gutsy performance from him. But this was pretty smart for what it was as well. But that was genuinely I think a tactical error, is that he tried to fight off his back. And allowed Usman much more time to get comfortable.
Yep.
Usman looked like a different fighter once Burns was up.
Yeah, he definitely got time to settle in and recover from whatever cobwebs might still have been lingering after that first shot. So this is the interesting
double-edged sword, the kicks in this one. I mean, in this one, they pretty much, they were just something that got him into trouble, surprisingly.
Yeah.
Really. It was mostly, I think he would have probably done much better if he just tried to box with Usman. Although I suspect the same calculus probably would have played out.
I don't think he can, though. His kicks are his ranged weapon, and Burns is actually uncommonly likely to punch off of kicks. A lot of MMA fighters throw punch-kick combos, but Burns frequently initiates with a kick and then fires his punch off of that. They really are he uses them the way a lot of other fighters like Usman uses his jab to create the exchange, to create the entry. So that's the interesting thing about this matchup is I feel like all the things we got right were tactical things, which is great. It feels nice. It's nice to notice the jab. It's nice to note the straight counters to the kicks specifically and Burns' reliance on the kicks. But what about the directionality? That is usually the thing I count on. And to me, the fact that Usman was, it wasn't just Burns' aggression. I mean, that was part of it. But even throughout the fight, Usman was just not as insistent to press as he normally has been. And I think it was Twitter user Phoenix Sky. Is that how he wants his name pronounced? I always read it in my head as Pheno X Sky, but it's probably Phoenix Sky.
Yeah, me too.
Yep.
We'll call him Pheno because that's funnier, I guess. Pheno was saying that he identified this as a problem with Trevor Whitman's fighters, that now Gaethje against Khabib and Usman against Burns, two occasions when it really seems like just doing the same old of insisting on pressing forward would have been the very best strategy. Both of them, from his perspective, failed to do so. That Gaethje was all on the back foot and trying to do lateral movement, and he basically supposed that Whitman has like an idea of fighting smart and building, which does not place much emphasis on directionality as part of the game plan. More of like discovering the tactics that work, which is sort of a criticism Phil and I have leveled at ATT over the years. They have a lot of tactical solutions, but they might just overlook the big strategic picture. I don't know how much of that we can really just lay at Whitman's door without knowing. This may have been a product of Usman and Burns' dynamic in the training room. These two fights may have been also a product of just how insanely aggressive the opponents were in both cases. Like Khabib has never pressured as hard as he did in that fight, and he's already a ferocious pressure fighter. And, as Phil noted at the top, Burns was super aggressive from the very beginning in this one. But, I don't know. It did make me wonder. Does Trevor Whitman, perhaps, is this, one of those like foibles that we will start to see more as we see now these like 2 or 3 championship caliber fighters continue to progress under him? Are they going to lose some of that fundamental aggression and pressure that made them so effective? Dan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's super interesting note by shout out to Pheno, follow him as well. Mm-hmm. And since you're, especially since you're going to bring up the old fight site boys there, something that kind of came away when doing a panel involving the aforementioned Gaethje. I like Gaethje a lot, but I found myself picking against him a lot, and we were all on different sides. But the kind of common thread we were discussing was that pressure grapplers seem to be the hardest to account for. And if there's any truth into that is still the case in today's modern era, if you will, then your point that you're bringing up from Pheno is really just like something to look at. Yeah, is that going to be a problem when his camp especially faces a pressure grappler? Will that especially be kind of brought out? And something I always, I've been bringing up more since we've either been in the big cage in Abu Dhabi or the small cage, is that the small cage really magnifies these things, if you will. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I did not see the directionality going this way, especially when you look at just kind of Usman's overall sample size. So
yeah, the sort of the anchor of my pick for Usman was much like in the Masvidal fight, the fact that Burns is going to put his back to the cage, and that is the last place you want to be against him. And Usman still found all these tactical solutions, all of these techniques that were going to work, but that was the thing that was missing. Phil, what do you think? Is Whitman neutering his fighters? Is he in part responsible for taking some of the heat out of these like pressure guys?
I think it's hard to say. Again, like I got to give a lot of credit to Burns. I think this was like one of his, and I think he has been learning more from that. As we saw in the Woodley fight, I think was when he was starting to really like pressuring. And I think, from Usman's perspective, I think he was really trying to find that slice of range. And where he could hit Burns and Burns couldn't hit him. And so it became, it was a big contest of rhythm and space, where the cross counters and the occasional like left hook were there for Burns, but it was the fact that Usman could keep picking up the jab, and the more he could, and the more he was able to kind of interrupt Burns, the more he was able to pick up the jab. Mm-hmm. And he didn't want to close distance and walk his way into the space where those right hands, left hooks, and credit to Burns, he also, he jabbed with Kamaru Usman mm-hmm. when he could, mm-hmm. like not much. So Usman just wanted to play off space and rhythm. Defensively, he was pretty much just backing up with his hand up to block, but he just wanted to make sure that he was in that range where he was dictating. Because I think that is who Usman is at heart. He is not someone who really, I think he's very much someone who thinks about what he's doing and how that will make the other person do things. Mm-hmm. Rather than, worrying about what they're going to do. It's why I think he's probably never going to be a great defensive fighter. Mm. I think he was looking to just establish that range. He found it easier to do from a relatively neutral standpoint. I think, as I said, I don't know if he has the defense to be able to safely, like, really close someone like Burns down. So he just kind of didn't. He set up that all those traps with the jab, and then eventually, the other big turning point was that was when he landed his own right hand.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure about this. I haven't watched the fight probably enough times. Was that the first rear hand punch he threw in the fight?
I don't think exactly, but the point stands. The fact that you might think of it as the first rear hand punch says something. It was a lot of jabs, and then he finally uncorked that right hand.
Because he'd thrown southpaw. He'd thrown the odd southpaw jab by then.
Yep.
But it was the fact that Burns, I think, threw away a right hand, and then slid off to his left to avoid the inevitable jab coming. Mm-hmm. Sort of counter the counter, and Usman just absolutely clocked him with the right hand. Mm-hmm. The first one he threw. So yeah, it was a good building performance from Usman, and I think that maybe the lack of pressure is just, I think it might just be a technical limitations thing at this stage, because again, like, he's still not a defensively incredible fighter, and to get to that safe slice, he had to be pretty neutral against someone as aggressive as Burns.
Yeah, I think there's something there as well. I just love comparing and contrasting these guys as products of Henry Hooft, and I'm going to emphasize once again, I think a lot of what we saw here from Usman is from Henry Hooft. I don't know how much of Trevor Whitman's training has sunk in yet. Maybe he had an influence on that willingness to fight backwards, although as Phil said, there were a lot of pressing material reasons for that as well. But like the Colby Covington fight was all Henry Hooft's work with Kamaru Usman, and we saw very much the same thing here. One of those differences, I think we saw in those first two rounds, in the lead up to that big right hand counter you mentioned, Phil, was, in my article last week, I tied this to their stances, though I think there's far more ways to explain it than that, but a different approach to counterpunching between these two guys as well. That Gilbert Burns, in my article, I was talking about the fact that Gilbert Burns is much more of a front-weighted fighter than Kamaru Usman. The comparative advantages and disadvantages of having more weight on your front foot and therefore your head closer to the opponent. And for Burns, what we have seen a lot of lately are hard trigger same time counters. A lot of times someone will touch his guard and then he'll fire back immediately with like a big left hook, sort of how the counter of Damian Maia played out. A lot of other times it'll just be same time, like the cross counter he hit Usman with. That's how he counters. His weight is forward, his head is there, so he just wants to, he knows he's open and he wants to crack you as you try to get him. Exactly what happened in the beginning phases. Usman, a little more back weighted, more of a sort of a fighter who keeps his eyes on his opponent and builds. Even before Whitman, however much we want to lay that at his feet, lay these changes at his feet, that has been Usman's, that's the fighter he's been developing into, is someone who watches his opponent from a relatively safe distance, seated back in his stance a little, and builds. And so his counters tend to be, like the right hand that finally put Colby Covington down, ones where he will like take a half step back and then re-enter the pocket with his long range and fire straight down the middle. And that is very much what that like pull right hand was that knocked Burns down. So I don't know, an interesting look at sort of contrasting styles. But I think some evidence that Usman has already kind of been this like tactical building sort of striker, whether or not he's pushing forward. I think this is sort of a mold into which he's been shaping himself for quite some time. Dan, what do you think?
I really love the stance notes, and I don't disagree with those anything per se. And that was kind of one thing as far as when I was looking at the stances, is that it was weird because back to your kind of intro point and how we were kind of picking apart the speculation as far as him being caught early. Is it a deeply rooted thing with camps, which is something I try to look for.
Sure.
I think it's important both in wall work or the pressure kind of themes we're speaking about. And I know I spoke a bit about that. I did notice some footwork changes as far as the drifting as opposed to stepping, keeping a little more safer shuffles on balance. You could definitely write those off as Trevor Whitman MOs, but I do agree with your point that I still see a lot of hoof, and that's not to take away from Trevor. I feel like we're giving him, and you guys do a great job of giving him credit. So it's certainly not that. But I agree with that note in particular. And the stance switching thing that I found strange is like, you see a lot of Kempo karate guys, they prefer the open stance. Machida, even like Pettis, traditional martial artists, right? Maybe we'll talk a bit about the, Barber even, but Usman seemed like he liked the same stance, and I got to imagine it's key. And he's spoken about this in his efforts to developing both stances. Like I stumbled upon some old Chad Mendes article I wrote for Flow back in the day, and I saw a random note that said Chad Mendes fought his first fight in southpaw stance, and he never went back to it. And in a lot of these things, it's from wrestling. So usually when guys are switch stance or they have that ability, they're either coming from karate or traditional martial arts, or wrestling. So that pliability can often be hard for, at least for me to read, especially a guy that has those kind of quiet ranges like Usman. But before we range off this topic, and if it doesn't take it too far off topic, because this is more of a ground note, but back to just the heart of it for me, seeing that it was pacing. I believe the tactical calls, like you said, were on point. The pacing was the interesting note for me. And I also agree with Phil's note, as far as the turning point actually happened on the ground. And if it doesn't sidetrack, I want to get your opinion on this, guys, but I've been seeing more of those waterfall body shots come into play. I believe Jan hurt Aldo with one. A guy on the undercard, Phil Rowe, had some nice ones in his prior fight. And even unathletic guys like Rick Glenn would do a lot of damage with it on like the WSOF scene. And that seemed to be not just the big mistake of letting Kamaru recover, but he let Kamaru recover to the point where it looked like he hurt Burns maybe to the body first, again, not taking credit away from the work on top, but
he certainly
I just wanted
got
to throw that in there.
A big reaction out of him, right? Like suddenly there was a moment where Burns really wanted to get back up. I don't know if he just felt the tide turning or what, or if he was hurt, but there was a moment where he was suddenly really interested in returning to his feet. Yeah, that's like an old school thing. That's like Fedor Emelianenko used to do that. The body shots. Interestingly, I'm suddenly remembering a time that Tyron Woodley himself was on this show, and his opinion was that body shots when you're on your back don't have the same effect. That there's some like dissipation that happens. But I think, as you noted, Dan, we have seen that they can be effective, especially when you're like, going all Shogun Hua and using gravity to your advantage, really arcing in. Yeah, Phil.
Was that not Jason High?
Maybe it was Jason High.
I think it was,
Maybe it was Jason High.
DC Bandit.
Love Jason High. Very exciting fighter. Been talking about coming back to the UFC, and I would happily see him back in the UFC. Always entertaining. But yeah, that's an interesting note. Those body shots do seem to be becoming somewhat more prevalent. I think it just makes sense. It's the nearest target that is going to do attritive damage. Seeing that combined with the considered powered, full powered low kicks to the hamstring, that seems like something right up Kamaru Usman's alley. Just investing in all of these attritive options that are just already open, really. You don't have to put yourself at risk. You don't have to advance position. These are the things I can hit from the position I'm in right now. Might as well take them. I think that is, in a lot of ways, a big part of Usman's style. So, very interesting.
I mean, I think the style of the body shot probably has something to do with it, right? You call them waterfall ground and pound. I like that.
Mm-hmm. I like that
I've
too.
Never, because it's difficult to think of people getting hurt from ground and pound that looks like typical body punches, from a grounded position, unless there's some heinous physical disparity, who was it that Rick Story murdered? Dustin Haysler, I think.
Oh, poor Dustin Haysler.
Just stuffed him in the locker. Most of it, because I think that there's got to be something about the way that the mat kind of transmits force that makes traditional body shots really, difficult to make work from a ground and pound position. Because most of the other famous body work from the ground position, it's been stuff like
the Tito
Rampage's elbows against Chuck, and then it's just been I think it seems to be just solar plexus shots. Rashad Tito, Jan Aldo, and this just literally trying to drive a fence post through the other guy.
Yep. Trying to turn your opponent into a butterfly, trying to pin them to the floor, basically.
What I love about it really quick is that a lot of the fighters, and we saw this in other fights too, is that they accompany with it by holding the heel. And just by holding your hook in a leg, I mean, you just neutralize so much from a grappling or get-up perspective. Mm-hmm. And, we would have seen a lot more, Musashi Jacare upkick KOs, right? If that were a high percentage thing in MMA, which it's obviously not. But then you have, and I don't want to bury the lead because we'll probably talk about this matchup perhaps, but you have some guys that are so dedicated body punchers, like the Rick Stories of the world, that there's a guy, a middleweight on this card who, when he got to his dominant positions, he was still primarily punching to the body and not the head, which I found funny. He just loves body work so much. He was in a mount and still trying to punch the body. It was great.
Last thing I just want to hit, Dan, you've mentioned pace a couple of times. I think that was also a factor here, and is going to be a factor throughout Usman's championship reign. He is a pace fighter. He may not be Colby Covington, but there is a certain aspect of, cardio as a weapon that Usman has long had, sort of attached to his belt. He has used that to break and wear down really good fighters. Hence, the reputation for being a decision machine. But like GSP, he will physically and psychologically just tax people until they can't take anymore. I kind of wonder if that is going to be a thing for Gilbert Burns for the rest of his welterweight run as well. One thing that stands out a lot more in retrospect about his fights leading up to this is how sort of sporadic they all were in terms of pace. Because Burns has turned into a really confident, burst striker. He throws really hard, full commitment. And I think he's really relied on being able to scare people out of firefights with that. Notably, he went 5 rounds, and the commentators were talking about how he just kept getting more aggressive, but that was against Tyron Woodley. If you want time to slowly build an attack, that's the guy to do it. He's not going to push back that hard at all. Just fundamentally, you are going to get to set your own pace. And then, again, some people pointed out that maybe I shouldn't rely too much on the Rashid Magomedov fight, which I used as a parallel to this one. I also went back and reviewed that fight with Alexei Kunchenko, who is himself not a super high output fighter. And that was only a 3-round fight, and Burns was kind of shattered by the third round. In fact, he lost the third round so badly that fight probably should have been a draw. He won the first two, and, he got his legs completely chewed up. He was retreating the whole time. If it weren't for a, powerful and well-timed takedown, he may have gotten badly hurt or finished. Despite the fact that that's not really a thing Kunchenko does to people. He still managed to push the pace enough that Burns couldn't keep up. I think that was a factor here as well. I do think Burns just, started to gas, by the end of this fight.
I agree. I'll just say that, in Burns' defense, I think he might have took that one on shorter notice, but like all his fights at welterweight were on short notice, so he's clearly been able to thrive there as well.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like the Rashid Magomedov is a bad example, because I do believe that at the heart of it, it does tie in with Kunchenko, as I agree with those notes. Everyone's got to be human, right, and kind of have some kind of foible, if you will. And I think that is the thing, at least to watch.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's wrap up. We're well over half an hour, which I kind of saw coming, but all the same, there are more fights to cover besides this one. We've got the Macy Barber versus Alexa Grasso fight, the co-main event that Dan has alluded to several times already. Kelvin Gastelum versus Ian Heinisch was also on this card, and our boy Bilal, remember the name Muhammad, had a very, predictably exciting performance of his own on the prelims. We're going to talk about all of that, possibly more, and then, at the very end, Blaydes versus Lewis after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are moving on down the main card of UFC 258 onto the co-main event, Alexa Grasso versus Macy Barber. This is one where I feel like the dynamic was very, very clear and easy to read. And that is not boasting. That just takes, literally you could have just watched Macy Barber's fight with JJ Aldrich and seen what the struggle was going to be here. The questions going in were, has Macy Barber changed or improved? And, can she just once again, despite, whether or not she's improved at all, can she just bull her way back into this fight after a rough start? Both of those things pretty much happened. Well, the change more than the improvement. I'll tell you what I noticed about Macy Barber in this fight was a certain resemblance to an old friend of ours, Shogun Rua. And not the most flattering kind of resemblance. You guys remember when Shogun used to do his little Mike Tyson impression when he was 10 feet away from his opponent? He would do that little, bobbing sort of peekaboo head movement where his head was barely moving enough that if punches were coming at him, they would be slipped. And then once he got into range, that would go away. That's kind of the vibe I got from Macy Barber here. Her stance was notably different, which is in itself a big improvement. She was not upright. She had her hands up high. It really was like a peekaboo guard. It was like a, novice's first attempt at being defensively responsible. But all of it kind of melted away the moment she engaged with Alexa Grasso, which is not altogether surprising. Barber is coming from a huge deficit, defensively speaking, compared to Alexa. But, still extremely hittable, in a way that, in a Pat Cummins kind of way, where when she gets hit, it's not just that it's easy to hit her, it's like every shot that hits her is incredibly clean and damaging. So, that's going to be a problem going forward. But, Dan, what else did you see in this matchup?
This matchup kind of went the way I thought. The one thing I was kind of glaringly wrong that I had reversed was I picked Grasso. I didn't think she was getting enough credit in the clinch. I know you guys are obviously, been on Grasso and aware of her game. But just as far as the general commentary, the general kind of talk going into this fight, right? You even heard like the commentators going, I don't know why Barber is the underdog here. She was, kickboxing the crap out of some air, as Lucas Bourdon was saying, just messing up the person right in front of Grasso, right? Just effing her up.
Yes.
So that was a great moment. But it's hard because you're right. She did go out there and try to show some, initial improvements. And this was her first camp with a gentleman who I've been admittedly unfair on, because there's two people with their first camp, that fought on this card. I'm not trying to, break format. There just is a lot of connecting themes. One is Barber and the other, who I won't mention, but Connor is very excited, and they maybe had the best striking performance of the whole night. So it's one of those things where,
who is it?
Where does the blame?
I don't care.
Kind of Mike Valley Flow Striking.
Yeah. And who had the best, who in your opinion had the best striking performance of the night?
Bilal, probably, I guess, even though he was getting hit with, maybe not the best, but it's obviously a stark comparison and an unfair one, obviously, comparing, Bilal, his technique and experience to a Barber.
But two things, Dan. A, never hold back. If you want to mention Bilal Muhammad at any point, you do so. Okay. This is that kind of show. 2, don't forget the name. All right. Please move on.
And always remember the name.
Always remember the name.
But I think I just bring up the coach's name more because I've traditionally been hard on this guy just because I've seen him in the corner of like Yair versus Frankie or Juliana Pena. And like, back when Yair was only throwing strikes from one side of his body, which was really frustrating. And then every time I looked at the guy's pad work, like, again, I'm not some kind of pad work, master or a know-it-all or anything like that, folks. But you guys seen enough pad work to know that when you see pad work that kind of stands out to you, maybe not in the best way, you're like, I don't know about all that spinning stuff, how practical that's going to be, but okay. I had a bad feeling for Barber, in other words, going into this. Yeah. Now, the one thing I did thought was in her favor, and perhaps you guys can share your opinion, is that, offhand, I do know that she did some southpaw stance as she normally does. Again, Barber, like a lot of traditional martial artists, they prefer the open stance look. And I thought that was going to perhaps help sway things her way when we looked at how Grasso's camp dealt with their first southpaw in Aldana versus Holly Holm, right? I mean, someone just told him to sell out for the weak side, and she just followed her around the cage the whole time. Mm-hmm. And you look at it and you're like, there's no southpaws in that camp. Aldana's never faced a southpaw before Holm. Grasso, at least going back to all her UFC and Invicta fights, has never faced a southpaw. So I was like, ooh, I don't know how this is gonna play out, but I liked Grasso's approach of just kind of, what she's done before, that kind of feinting into like a crash counter and just meeting her opponent. Mm-hmm. And that was working really well, perhaps better than, the commentary who's leading on it sometimes, not to pick on them, just saying like they got really excited for a Barber exchange at the end of the first. But I'm like, Grasso started that exchange by landing on her and punctuated the exchange with the harder shot.
Yeah,
but all right.
That happened a couple times where Barber would really sell out, but the most meaningful shot of the exchange would be Grasso's counter. And they just didn't see it happening. Yeah. I don't know how much you can attribute the Barber's lack of success to, maybe she just doesn't have that kind of depth as a southpaw. I think there's something to that, certainly. Mm-hmm. But there's also something to the fact that, more than Aldana, I don't know, Aldana's a much more fundamentally hesitant fighter than Grasso. So I think whether or not you told Grasso these like sort of, rote, trite anti-southpaw tactics, she's a lot more likely to just do what she does. And, she throws 1, 2, 3s. Like whether you're a righty or a lefty, she's going to target you and throw the combinations she's used to throwing, the ones she knows work. And turns out those things also work against southpaws, especially, bad ones. So she was frequently able to interrupt Barber's crazy flurries earlier on just by throwing the combination she's used to throwing. She didn't overthink anything. And Barber has no choice but to overthink everything because she's just not technically developed in that way. No matter what strides she's made, she's a huge deficit, to Grasso in terms of striking technique. Phil, what do you think, man?
I mean, the first thing you mentioned, Barber, starting things from too far away was really the story of this fight. Because I think Dan's point on, the Southpaw matchup was a really interesting one because I don't think Grasso could land the jabs that she wanted to in this fight unless she was, strafing over to Barber's, like, past Barber's shoulder and then, like, hitting her with combinations. She really wasn't able to, like, she was able to put together the combinations, but it was the fact that Barber was starting her combinations from miles out.
Yeah.
That was just giving her, like, counter opportunities for pretty much what she wanted. I think, Barber still shows potential because as I think, in the we'll see when we talk about the Heinisch-Gastelum fight, just being a really good athlete who is trying really hard to win can paper over a lot of technical flaws.
Absolutely.
Because even if Barber's approach did not change, Barber's approach throughout the fight didn't change that much, but she managed to win the third round on pretty much everyone's scorecard.
Oh, yeah.
Simply by doing the same thing, but harder.
I mean, she was close in that round to just at any moment winning the whole fight. She was coming on so hard, and Grasso was being overwhelmed for most of the third round. So yeah, she almost did exactly what she did to beat JJ Aldrich, and it very well could have worked again. One small exchange playing out differently, and she might have dropped Grasso and at least earned herself a draw or something,
Yeah. And it is almost certain. It is good for Barber that did not happen.
Probably. Yeah. This one actually turned out to be a prospect loss. And we supposed last week that may have been the problem with the Aldrich fight, why none of the, lessons laid out on the table in that one were really absorbed by her, or didn't seem to have been. So yeah, that's a good point. It's probably good for her that she lost. It'll slow her momentum, maybe force her to step back and actually consider why she's doing what she's doing in the gym.
And, she also got, it was the fact that she also might have been able to turn the second round, and she got, Grasso down. Grasso, hit that nice armbar sweep on her and then, like, almost ended up arm triangling her. So, it's certainly a go back to the drawing point moment for Barber, but, like, again, can't really teach just, like, grit and will and raw physical power and durability.
Yeah. No, I don't mean to write her off at all. That's what we learned in the Aldrich fight. That was at least do you have the bare mental essentials to be a contender? And we saw in that fight she does. She's tough. She is competitive. She can take a beating, and through little more than mental effort, come back to win, because she doesn't have much of a deep well of technique to draw upon. And we saw that once again. I don't think we learned anything new, but a reminder that, Maycee Barber is very young and very physical. She has a lot of advantages, going her way, and being, like, basically outclassed for most of this fight, she still managed to almost win it, or at least make it, as even as it could have been. She just doesn't have the layers. I agree with
all those notes.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, Dan, I didn't mean to talk over you there.
Oh, no, you're good. All good.
She just doesn't have the layers that Grasso has. Like, that's, that was what kept Grasso from being overwhelmed, in a way that Aldrich couldn't keep up with Barber at a certain point. She's not really that kind of fighter. Grasso, as we saw numerous times when Barber would try to just pour on the volume and storm after her, maybe she would land at the beginning of the combination. Maybe she would surprise Grasso. But Grasso showed again and again an ability to find moments of defense to just a split second in the midst of an exchange where she could roll and sidestep, get to a new angle, buy a split second of time to regain the initiative in that exchange. Barber would touch her with something. She would drive her back, and then Grasso would counter and then roll under and get away, or take a step back, or pivot, something to get her just like a foothold in the exchange where she could then reestablish herself as a threat. That happened over and over, and Barber just can't think in layers like that. She doesn't have the technique or the experience to be able to keep up with somebody who is capable of thinking past the beginning of each exchange. So, still a fun fight. Barber's got absolutely has potential. I don't think this was damning at all for her. And hopefully, as Phil said, this will be a result that will actually force her to reevaluate and develop further. And she seems like a competitive person. I don't think she wants to be a future Barber, despite the nickname. So I think she's going to make a real go of it. And it's probably a good thing if she takes a slight step back in competition as well. All right, let's take one more break. When we come back, it's Derrick Lewis versus Curtis Blaydes. Woo! After this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Hey, guys.
Hey, what's up?
Hello.
Ready to wrap up in...
Let's go.
I'll say one thing. Bilal remember the name Muhammad. Even though he lost to Jeff Neal, he would have done better against Wonderboy than Jeff Neal did.
He would have, goddammit. He would have picked the right fucking tactics.
Can move his feet, can move his head,
Yep.
and he can throw low kicks.
Yep.
Yep.
You were 100% right.
Also,
arguably more durable than Jeff Neal.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. Yeah,
Come
probably.
on, he's a tough bastard. I'll give him that.
Yeah. I think mentally, definitely like mentally more durable.
Yeah.
Recoverability, good.
Yeah. Just before this, so I went to feed the cat and he knocked his bowl off the side, so I exiled him from the kitchen. This fucking cat, I lost him on a Greek island. And into like spent a day like walking through incredibly spiky Greek undergrowth looking for him. And he would just like every 10 minutes he would go like ow. Literally every 10 minutes.
Dan Phil
He'd be like, okay, he's here. Where the fuck he is.
Dan Phil was setting himself up perfectly for like if there is a Greek Jason, you know, if there is a Greek Michael Myers, if there is a Greek slasher out there, Phil was literally begging to be killed by him looking for this cat.
Yeah.
He was going out in the woods at night, hearing strange noises and going, Hector? That is begging.
I literally did it at midnight on a completely deserted like island hillside with no one around for miles. It's like hearing sounds which were clearly not the cat. Just being like, Hector? Is that you? I'm thinking, this is what people do in slasher films. It's never there.
Except Greek Jason would have probably been just coincidentally out there hunting lamb and just stumbled across you.
Yeah. He would have also ironically also been called Jason.
Yes. He just would have had a team of a team of sailors with him.
Yeah.
all with unique powers.
Greek slashers always have a crew of shipmates, strangely enough.
Yeah. Yeah, so like when I did that, he would just like a meow every 10 minutes. So he knocked his bowl off the side just now, and I exiled him from the kitchen. And within seconds, he was just lamenting outside the door, just howling. You did, little son of a bitch.
That's why you should have got a girl cat. Boy cats are inferior.
Huh?
They're annoying in a way that girl cats never are. Girl cats are such sweethearts, you know?
Notoriously so, yes.
What are you trying to say? Boy cats are all rapists. All right, Hector is he's a future rapist.
I don't care about racism, Connor. You've made this abundantly clearer for many episodes.
Okay. Should we dive into our last fight?
Why not?
Yep. Let's do it.
All right. We've talked about everything else. We may as well talk about Curtis Blaydes versus Derrick Lewis. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. The main event of next week's card is one of maybe 2 or 3 fights that seem at a glance to be worth watching at all. But it is one that is very much worth watching. And Phil, you pointed out before, we've apparently done this on the show before. They scheduled this bout initially towards the end of November last year, and I don't remember breaking it down. But I do think there's a lot to be said here because if we learned anything from Curtis Blaydes' last fight, it's that he is potentially very susceptible to the ingeniously stupid way that Derrick Lewis tends to beat people. Because, I don't know about you, but Alexander Volkov, to me, was doing about the best Derrick Lewis impression I have seen any other heavyweight do in that fight with Curtis Blaydes, and it kinda worked. I mean, he lost, but if he had had Derrick Lewis's power, who knows how that fight might have ended up. He definitely, wore Blaydes down just by, letting him take him down but not going away. So, I don't know, Phil. Does that still feel like a likely possibility to you?
Yeah, I mean, this is simply the how far can Derrick Lewis's style against wrestlers possibly take him?
Yeah,
this would be the ultimate affirmation of us realizing that not only is BJJ fake. Wrestling is fake.
At least heavyweight wrestling. We've suspected for some time. But Derrick Lewis certainly fights as if it is. And it works more often than not. The guy gets taken down. He stays calm. He picks his moment to do a big, bench press to free himself. And he fights with a degree of confidence and surety that would be positively moronic in any other division. He fights with this, foreknowledge that at some point he's gonna get to land the knockout shot. And that if he just keeps himself in the fight until it happens, he'll be fine. And, I really do think that, Curtis Blaydes is gonna win every moment of this fight. But there's a really good chance that he still loses, just because of how that matchup works. Dan, what do you think, man?
Yeah, this is tough for me because you characterized Derrick Lewis so well when you said he is the type of guy who just seems like he goes through life in that big 4x4 pickup truck, daring something just to stumble under him, and that's kind of how
I hope somebody crashes into me today. Yeah.
And I feel like that's how half of the losses at heavyweight happen. You're just like that person in Speed. You end up trying to step off the bus and you fall under the wheels, and that's kind of how the loss ends up happening in this division.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man. I initially picked Curtis Blaydes when I first broke this fight down, and I released the pick officially with the breakdown and all that because the COVID pullout happened, I believe, sometime between the weigh-in and November when this fight was initially supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was a bias of fights that were going on because we had fights like Figueiredo Perez or AJ McKee Caldwell where we were seeing something that I've kind of, maybe not so much at heavyweight, but as far as the game progressions that are needed, you need more than just wrestling these days, obviously. And if you don't have a good ground control game and or good finishing game, whether it's finish off of positional cooking or opportunistic finishes off takedowns and grappling entanglements, then you're eventually better have to, depend on your cardio and not falling apart. So we've seen some of these fighters that maybe struggled and would stay in fights a bit too long, like a Caldwell, a la Horiguchi, and so on and so forth. And I don't know if that bias was playing in my head, guys, but I actually went ahead and picked Derrick Lewis, who I pretty much always pick against. And Curtis Blaydes, I'm not sure. I may have picked against him once. So this does not make any sense for me, but I'm kind of leaning toward Derrick Lewis to survive the storm and get a late stoppage. And I know Blaydes said that the reason when he looked back was because of Volkov's guard. And that is true. His long torso, his long legs did make it difficult for him. Obviously Lewis isn't going to offer that same style. but Lewis isn't even going to offer a jiu-jitsu style anyways. And for as much problem as the long legs and torsos perhaps gave Blaydes trouble, it also gave him things to link up and hook into.
Right.
When Volkov would do his own version of turtling, which is different than the master of the tripod stand-up, which is so that's going to be the big question. He's going to get him down. That's not the question. The question is, how does Curtis Blaydes play off of the tripod getup, especially because he's not a submission guy?
Mm-hmm.
You know, does he have to get Derrick Lewis out of there? And the only people that have knocked Derrick Lewis out were early in his career against paw strikers, ex-football players, and Sean and Matt Mitrione, and then a comment against, Junior Dos Santos, and a fight where, injury and Derrick Lewis intangibles and can't take him serious aside. He was sitting there chewing down wings with a broken back before the fight against Mark Hunt. I mean, say what you will, older, but more, credentialed MMA strikers, if you will.
Absolutely.
I think I'm going to stick with Lewis here, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you mentioned something interesting at the top there. I think you were sort of suggesting what I think of as like the smart argument for fighting dumb, which is that we usually think, when we think of smart fighters, we think of fighters who just keep their opponent controlled the whole time. Kamaru Usman does this a lot. And one thing that people rarely appreciate is the fact that if you have a style that keeps your opponent in the fight, that is potentially catastrophic. Fighting it's not like a foot race. The guy in last place can win at any moment. And if your style is not designed to get finishes, but rather just to control the opponent and slowly break them down, you are giving them a lot of time to find a finish. And that is, like, interestingly, specifically what Derrick Lewis does against Curtis Blaydes or otherwise. That is what he does frequently. He did it to Alexander Volkov himself, whom Blaydes couldn't finish. And that's the other side of that Blaydes is not a huge finishing threat. There's part of me that says, Derrick Lewis is big and strong. Most heavyweights get shattered trying to out-wrestle him, but we watched Daniel Cormier, one of the few heavyweights who can really wrestle well, and he had no issue whatsoever. But Cormier has finishing moves on the ground. Cormier has dating back to the Dave Camarillo days at AKA, he has a great wrestler's jiu-jitsu game. And if you expose your back, as we saw against Anthony Johnson, he will jump on that and finish you. I'm not sure he would have finished Derrick Lewis just with the sort of chipping away ground and pound that sort of both he and Blaydes prefer. Derrick Lewis has gotten really good at just staying calm and surviving singular bad moments, in the belief that he will eventually create a similar bad moment for his opponent down the road. So, I think Derrick Lewis is like an extremely valid pick, and it's one of those weird cases where he's probably going to lose the entire fight up to the moment that he wins, if he does win, but that doesn't make it any less likely, because that's Derrick Lewis's thing. Phil, what do you think?
I think, given this incredibly silly matchup time to percolate, I think I'm actually a bit more confident in Blaydes as a pick, which is probably going to come back disastrously on me.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think there's a few things about, like, the way some of the matchups have played out. I think firstly, like, Volkov on the ground as opposed to Lewis. I think there's probably some merit in Blaydes saying, he got tired because it was Volkov. Because Volkov is actually, as we've said, genuinely somewhat tireless.
Yeah.
And actually, like, works a lot from his back.
Yeah.
Derrick Lewis does not work from his back. He does sort of the opposite of it. And I'm not sure that he's actually a particularly exhausting person to be, like, on top of, unless he's much stronger than you, which is most heavyweights. And I'm not actually sure that it's Curtis Blaydes. Lewis might actually be, stronger than Curtis Blaydes, but I don't think he's much stronger than him.
No, probably not. That's an interesting point. The question is essentially how much was Volkov responsible for the slow collapse of Blaydes' cardio in that fight? If he had been as bad at defending takedowns and as reluctant to do anything about it after he's taken down as Lewis is, would Blaydes have just had 5 rounds of more or less the same activity? Maybe.
Yeah. And I think it's just, he's a fairly simple Lewis. As I said, he has a few fairly simple tricks where he just tripods and turns over and bridges and stands back up to his feet. And, as you said, so the thing which allowed Cormier to capitalize on that is that he's pretty good at rear naked choking people. But the other thing that Cormier was able to do was ride him.
Yes.
And that's what I would suspect. Blaydes is elevation, right?
These days.
Generally a pretty good, well-prepared camp. I would generally expect them to just be training rides, because not only did Cormier rear naked choke Lewis, he was able to beat him up quite a bit from the ride position.
Yeah.
And Blaydes had, I think, Volkov in the ride for a lot of the first round.
Riding does seem to be one of the more meaningful wrestling skills at heavyweight. At heavyweight, a good ride is basically as good or better than a pin. Stipe Miocic would not have beat Francis Ngannou, perhaps, if he wasn't so effective in just being able to ride him and keep his weight in a controlled position. Like, a lot of that fight was spent with Ngannou halfway back to his feet and not being able to complete the trip. And Blaydes also showed that riding ability was instrumental to his win over Volkov as well, because Volkov was repeatedly giving up his back and trying to work to his feet, and Blaydes was able to sort of sit out in that referee's position and keep him there for extended periods of time. That being said, 2 points I'm going to raise. A, Derrick Lewis just gets up in a truly unique way. Like, people have gotten to good riding positions. Again, Cormier had success here, but it's a little different than Volkov. It's maybe not constant work rate, but if there's a little detail off, he might just stand up. So that's something to consider. The other thing is, again, Volkov himself is an endless font of cardio, as you said, Phil, and Derrick Lewis still knocked him out. He didn't need to get him tired. He just needed to still be there. And that is the fundamental flaw with Curtis Blaydes' style that Derrick Lewis can uniquely take advantage of. Curtis Blaydes has been hurt in a lot of fights. A lot. He almost got knocked out by Mark Hunt. He almost got knocked out with a single knee by Alistair Overeem in a fight he otherwise dominated. He still ate some hellacious shots in single moments. Derrick Lewis is probably less clever than all these guys, but he's probably harder hitting than any of them. And, need I even mention Curtis Blaydes lost twice to Francis Ngannou, who just caught him with big single shots. So again, I think giving Derrick Lewis 5 rounds to maybe find that is dangerous. And as good as Blaydes' cardio may be, as less taxing as Lewis's, answer to the wrestling game may end up being, Lewis is still going to be there willing to throw power shots, as long as Blaydes lets him survive. And that seems likely to be a long time. So I don't know. It's way more of a gamble type of pick than I would normally make, but it's Derrick Lewis. It's what he does. So I'm going to pick him. I don't care.
Yeah. I think I'm going to just side with double down on my original pick with Lewis as well. I will add, I know this fight's almost 3.5 years ago, but the Daniel Omielanchuk fight always sticks out to me too, because not just because Derrick Lewis actually his underhooks and cage defense has actually been shown to get better in this recent stretch where he actually has looked improved from a cardio and semi-technical standpoint, though I use that very loosely, obviously.
It's Derrick Lewis. Any improvement feels like a leap. Yeah.
But speaking to that, this is the question I want to ask you guys as the last note on it for me, is that even though his style is obviously is stupid, but it's also kind of smarter in the sense of it's an adjusting style. And even though his style is basically an adjustment of just stupid adjustments, he's still adjusting. Whereas from the Omielanchuk fight to just in general, I don't know how much adjusting Blaydes could do. I mean, even when I went back to watch his first stepping onto the UFC to get a better idea, he just seems to always have that gear. And you see the coaches from early on in the Volkov fight before it became a problem, the coaches, if they're very like speaking to their fighter like a child, that probably tells me that guy has got a really fragile ego. So the coaches will tell you a lot about their fighter with how they talk to him. And right away from round one, as dominant as it was, they're almost urgent. Like Blaydes is already gasping, like, breathe, take your breaths. It's almost like they know, right? Because even though he's training at cardio, he's a specimen. Like Chael Sonnen said, it doesn't matter what weight class, whether we're talking about Khabib or anybody, you can only wrestle for so long. You need to take kind of some rounds off. We even see the greats like Khabib do it at lower weight classes, much less a heavyweight. So my worry is that, like, I could totally see the theory of, like, yeah, he's not going to have to work as hard to pass or to get to positions. Lewis will probably let him get there, but regardless of what the opposition, I don't know if Blaydes can either adjust and or slow down, and that's what worries me.
There's also, to add to that, another thing that I've been looking out for since the Omialanchuk fight. I agree. I think you hit upon a very key detail. I don't think Curtis Blaydes is a very good adjuster. I think he sticks to what he's doing, and he does that to a degree that is in itself very impressive, right? Like I said, he will walk through some really badly damaging shots and just stick to what his game plan was coming in. The other thing, though, that we saw in the Omialanchuk fight, and we have had hints of since, is sort of, he's just not as remarkable a wrestler when he's clinching against the cage. He's a shot takedown dude. That's what makes him stand out so much at heavyweight. But perhaps a lot of Cormier's success in so dominantly out-wrestling Lewis came from the fact that he is a great clinch wrestler. He's really effective at finding takedowns in that exact phase. Blaydes, not so much. And this may be, again, the brilliant idiocy of Derrick Lewis's style. An example of when, like, just backing up into the cage and waiting for your opponent to do something might work in his favor. He's going to have the wall at his back to help him balance and get back up and to resist shot takedowns, which is what Blaydes kept going for again and again and again in that fight with Volkov. So, but also Blaydes might
Blaydes is undeniably a pretty robotic fighter.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I can't really think of many people. That's the thing. Because there are so few shot takedown artists at heavyweight, hard to think of many shot takedowns that people have thrown at Lewis.
That's a good point, too. Yeah.
Cormier, and I think I have seen him sprawl a few times. I think he has a decent sprawl. Because he's just a big guy and he likes belly splashing.
Yep.
Like, that's his winning celebration. I think it comes naturally to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
I'll just
so
add
Latifi. Oh, sorry. Go
on, Phil. Finish your thought.
No.
Finish your thought. Latifi and Cormier were mostly, mostly what we've seen people have success with Lewis against are body lock trip takedowns from Latifi, and single legs from Shamil Abdurakhimov, and I think and Cormier as well, right? Cormier turned a single leg into an ankle pick as well. Really not many doubles. I'm not sure if I would be telling Blaydes to shoot doubles.
Yeah, like Derrick Lewis is the reason.
Him very tired. B, I think that's probably the shot that Lewis is actually the best at defending.
Right.
Unless, you do it when he's swanging.
Derrick Lewis seems like the reason that you don't typically see doubles at heavyweight. Like, you don't want to end up sprawled out under that dude. That's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Dan, you were going to say
that's a great point. That's a great point.
Abdurakhimov did double leg him under a swang.
Well, yeah, there's always the possibility, but it's a risk reward thing, right? The possibility. I agree. Lewis does have a good sprawl the few times we've seen it. That is like also, if you know nothing about wrestling, but you're big and athletic, that's the move that you can do pretty naturally. I think he's got a good one. That's a quick trigger for him, but we'll see that tested in a way that it never has been. Dan, you were going to say before we wrap up?
Oh, you guys nailed. No, Phil nailed it. I completely agree. It's that the Abdurakhimov fight. I think it was kick takedowns, but in general, like Phil said, I didn't admittedly do the legwork this time around, but I did it not too long ago for this fight, and I noticed that just like Phil said, it's the outside trip from the body lock. Roy Nelson hits it all day, or it's single legs, which is something that Cormier preaches while at heavyweight. Mm-hmm. And when I rewatched the Volkov fight before this again to just rewatch that one more time. He's the first shot of the fight, which is it's perfect. He does like kind of almost like a quick snatch single and quickly is just chained off to the double. Like that is the perfect takedown to match his style with who he's fighting. But like many fighters, like we talk about, they'll start doing something early and it quickly goes away. And then the rest of the fight, it's just doubles, and doubles. So that is you guys nailed that point. That is something, doesn't mean he's going to win. Obviously we don't know, but you know, that looks to be in Lewis's favor.
Well, it's a very heavyweight matchup, but it's also a rare occasion where that isn't a synonym for bad. I'm still very interested in it. It's like a ridiculous dynamic in a way that only a heavyweight contenders match could be, but it is compelling. So looking forward to it. That's about it as far as this card is concerned, but I am looking forward to it. I might just not watch a lot of the prelims live. Dan, thank you so much for joining us for this episode today, man. Really appreciate your time and your insight. What should people know about you? The Protect Your Neck podcast, of course. You had me as a guest on there a couple weeks ago. We talked about top 5 athletic cheaters. I think I already plugged that on this show before, but had a great time in that. What else have you got coming up, or what else should people know about?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, just all my stuff from the podcast to the analysis work at Junkie, it's all on my Twitter at DanTomMMA. Probably just the easiest way. So I'll look to that. And thank you guys for having me. It was a real honor to be on. Obviously, you guys have both been on my show because I love you guys both. I love the work you do here. And, this was fun.
Absolutely, man. We're happy to have you.
Yeah.
Phil, you got anything to plug before we head out?
I do not. I'm still lazy.
Well, you got a cat. You know, you have an excuse now, right? Just blame it on Hector. As for me, if you missed it, I did put out an Usman Burns piece last week. Clash of Classmates, I think I called it, because I love alliteration. Sort of I don't know, it feels like in retrospect a bit disjointed. I tried to encompass a lot. I'm not sure how successfully I did that, but I did end up talking about a lot of things that, played out significantly in the matchup. I mentioned the difference in counterpunching approaches. I think we saw that in a couple of the most pivotal moments of the fight. I talked about their stances and different approaches to pressuring, and we also saw that play out, although not in the way it was expected. I talked about Kamaru Usman's jab, which he has done before this fight and did better than ever, I think, against Gilbert Burns. So if you want to check that out, that's on bloodyelbow.com. Otherwise, make sure you head over to the Heavy Hands Patreon this week. We talked about a lot more than you will have heard on this main episode, which means there will be a little off-cut bonus coming up. I also think before the month is done, Phil, we may try to do a little heavy bag segment next week because we have a couple of questions.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've done one. We have questions piling up. A couple of new patrons I saw were eager to have questions answered, so expect that on the Patreon. If not before the end of this month, then very early into next month, we're going to try and do that as well. It's $3 a month, folks, to listen to the episodes. It's not much, goddammit, and it's $5 if you want to have a question answered, and that's what we're going to be doing very soon. So thanks again to Dan for joining us. Thank you all for listening. Find us all on social media. Dan mentioned his handle already at DanTomMMA, right?
Yep.
You can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. I am at Boxing Bush, BUSCH, all of those on Twitter.com, of course. Find my writing at Bloody Elbow. Check out the Patreon. That's it. Thank you all for listening. If you came here today for the finer point of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.